I'm also a mother of 4 children, and my husband is Swedish. My name is Rosa Lastra, a professor of banking law at the University of London. I'm also a mother of 4 children, and my husband is Swedish, which means we have an international family. I've come to talk about the importance of understanding human anthropology to meet the needs of the home and family. Success can only be measured in the long term, but somehow, thank goodness, and I'd emphasize this, my name is Rosa Lastra, a professor of banking law at the University of London. I'm also a mother of 4 children, and my husband is Swedish, which means we have an international family. I've come to talk about the importance of understanding human anthropology to meet the needs of the home and family. Success can only be measured in the long term, but somehow, thank goodness, and I'd emphasize this, I've managed to have a professional career that has allowed me to combine an exciting job with my family. The key to success in my personal and professional life, if indeed it can be considered success in the short term, as, in my opinion, success can only be measured in the long term, is always getting your priorities right. In my case, the priority has always been my family, my husband and my children, being able to cultivate traditions at home, eating together, celebrating birthdays together, participating in important milestones in our children's lives, and also combining my profession, always knowing that one doesn't have time, but rather makes time. Normally, you should have supper at home because, according to a very wise Spanish saying, the family that eats together stays together for the rest of their lives. And in our home, we've tried to follow it to the letter. However, that doesn't mean that my husband and I don't ever go out to dinner occasionally, because it's also important to take care of the relationship as a couple. We have 4 children, and we both have intense professional lives. And apart from taking care of the children, we have to take care of the relationship that marked the beginning of the family. But returning to the question of trying to have supper at home, it's something that we've cultivated to such an extent. All 4 children have learned how to cook very well, and they also love to sometimes organize family suppers or dinners with friends. You come to a marriage, you come to a family with a background, a culture, a socioeconomic background, and you share with the other person. In my case, with my Swedish husband, a very different cultural background, also different religious background. When we got married, we had different ways of understanding what marriage commitment is. But we also understood that we both had to learn, that we had to be prepared to have common values. And those common values are what have kept our family together, though it's not easy. It's not easy because in some way we are conditioned by the environment in which we grew up. A multicultural environment is also a very enriching environment because you learn to be more tolerant, you learn to be more understanding, you learn to have more empathy, and you also learn that there are different ways of doing things, and that all of those things can lead to a good end, as long as the intention is good. An amusing example is that when I first went to Sweden to meet my in-laws, they gave me a toast in my honor, and I was surprised, thinking that everyone was looking at me. But in Sweden, when you give a toast, first you look straight into the person's eyes, to the right or to the left. So that custom, which was a nice custom as they wanted me to feel at home, actually made me feel uncomfortable. But I learned, and today when we give toasts, we do them in both the Spanish and Swedish way. So my children have learned that to learn different cultures, they need to be tolerant. For example, at Christmas, we also have all the Swedish customs and we cook typical Swedish dishes too. But we also have the Spanish custom of celebrating like they celebrate in Spain. The Three Kings, singing Christmas carols, typical sweets, and in that sense, the multicultural environment and small things that are the important aspects of life, and perhaps the biggest divisions, are very enriching, but it requires a lot of understanding and a lot of tolerance. Home management is important because you don't leave the things that are important in life to your free initiative. When you study a university degree, you're training. When you start a job, you're learning what work is. Life at home is not improvised. Home management also requires preparation. It requires short-term, medium-term, and long-term planning. And this home management also needs to be discussed among family members, particularly between the husband and wife, but also with the other people who, either through filial ties or sometimes relationships with people who might come to help us at home, are participants in a common vision that implies a household management which, in our case, tries to live life with principles and values. As I said at the beginning, in the small things and in the larger, more important things or divisions. The importance of domestic economy cannot be ignored. Sometimes in our society, since it is part of informal economy, it isn't adequately recognized. But domestic economy is a very important part of national economy. It plays an important part at the micro and macro level. At the micro level, because the family and home are the basic cell of society. And at the macro level, because a society that does not encourage family values is a society that, in the long term, will suffer from economic growth. Economics and law, as well as sociology and geography, study demographic changes extensively. Demographic changes, one of the most significant demographic changes not only in developed countries, but also in countries like China, is the lack of population growth. In the sense that families are not keen to have children, and this is already causing a major crisis that will continue, a crisis in the pension system, a crisis in public deficit that will affect us. Sometimes the relationship that can exist between the family and domestic economy and global economy is not understood, although it is on the increase. One of my old teachers and mentors, Professor Charles Goodhart at the University of London, a very well-known economist, has written a book precisely about how demographics affect the economy, though I would add that it also affects the family, the ability to have children, and the ability to have favorable policies. And how can you encourage people to have the children that, firstly, the husband and wife have decided to have, and secondly, those of us who have faith, I consider myself one of those who have faith, those that God sends us? How can families be given the opportunity to have more children? Well, for example, if both spouses work, by providing affordable daycare centers, which people can afford, having working hours that allow mothers to go home at a reasonable time, being able to take leave, not only maternity leave when babies are born, but also during the periods in life when, due to difficulties, both the husband and wife, in our case it has normally been the mother and the wife, have to take the time they need. And then, going back to me and my work in the field of banking and finance, which is what I teach, I'm a professor of banking law, financial regulation, economic law of international organizations, such as the International Monetary Fund, all these topics are very important. We sometimes measure happiness, or the GDP per capita, which undoubtedly includes personal happiness and family happiness as very important elements. Returning a little to another topic that I have shown a lot of interest in, even in work that I have done with national and international institutions regarding issues of financial inclusion, financial education is also important. Learning at a young age, learning at the family level how to manage money a little, whether you have a little or a lot, knowing that you have to manage it. That is, you have to live within your own limits. I always explain to my students when I talk about International Monetary Fund conditionality that it makes sense. Conditionality obliges countries to spend at a macroeconomic level what they earn or within what they earn. At the family level, it's quite similar. We have to adapt our life plan, our standard of living to the means we have. If households do not fulfill their functions as the family nucleus, and therefore the basic cell of society, what should be the center of society becomes marginalized, which leads to a situation at the macroeconomic and state levels that is not at all desirable. And we are already beginning to see it. Earlier, I was talking about how the pension system is suffering. Public spending, which is only going to accelerate unless there is a serious commitment to the importance of the family. In China, there has been a very negative policy of encouraging families to only have one child. Not only encouraging, but imposing its one-child policy on families. However, they have now realized that the model doesn't work because you have the poor son or daughter, often a son because many female fetuses were aborted. You have that child who has to support 2 parents and 4 grandparents, which has led us to an unsustainable situation. The Communist Chinese government is aware of this unsustainable situation and has already started policies that encourage families to have at least 2 children. But it is proving difficult because then having children implies making a sacrifice in the sense that at an economic level, social level, commitment level, each child you have logically requires time, effort, and, since I'm a professor of banking law, money. Therefore, it's important to understand that the basic cell of society, the family, which is framed within a home, must be fostered and placed at the center of policies. Rather than excluding it, it should be placed at the center of state, regional, and international. Although this may seem like an abstract thought, you have to plan. You have to speak sincerely to your spouse and discuss your financial means. What other financial means you may have, how you're going to raise your children, the children you'll be having. Discuss the kind of education you're going to give them, where you're going to live, which schools you're going to take them to. All of those decisions require a lot of planning. My grandmother, may she rest in peace, used to say with that Castilian vision, she was from Avila, she said with that Castilian vision that every child comes with a loaf of bread under their arm. So I would say that there is food for the people who have faith. As I said earlier, I include myself among those who have faith, that we must have, those of us who have faith, divine providence. Somehow things sort themselves out. I remember that at the beginning of my relationship with my husband, we started out with 2 suitcases, and thank God today we live very comfortably. We started with 2 suitcases in a rented flat in New York. We both worked in New York at the time. I had started teaching at Columbia University after having worked at the International Monetary Fund, and he was working in a bank. And we started a bit, I wouldn't say from scratch, because the fact of living in New York is already a privilege in itself. But we had 2 suitcases and the flat we were renting. I remember the first thing we did, I was still working in Washington, and the first thing we bought was a mattress because I was expecting our first child. Actually, I would say that in my case, I got pregnant with my children without much planning. The children started coming. So when I got pregnant with my first child, I told my husband that I would have to leave my job and go live in New York. I needed to look for a job in New York, and since I'd started teaching once a week at Columbia University, I managed to get a full-time job at Columbia University. So the first thing we bought was a mattress, and I spent my first night in New York in an empty rented apartment with my 2 suitcases and a mattress. Logically, the apartment had a bathroom and a kitchen. And then little by little, we bought everything else. And I thank God, although it's always true that I realize it's a privilege, we have lived very well. However, my advice is this: plan, talk, discuss, and adapt to the means that you have. Many families at the beginning of the marriage, sometimes in the middle of the marriage, and sometimes later, are faced by financial problems, and it isn't easy. You have to have compassion. You need support. I would give you 3 pieces of advice. First, a sincere discussion to be able to adapt the lifestyle to the means you have, and within those means, learn to enjoy the little things in life. A walk holding hands, a sunny afternoon, a sunset, a sunrise. Those things are all free. Dreaming is also free. Sometimes when my children say, "Mom, to have a family, I need this, that, and everything that lies beyond," I always tell them, well, in my case, God helps. And secondly, that dreaming is free. They can dream, and that many times dreams come true. First of all, the sincere discussion. Secondly, to plan well. In other words, don't rest on your laurels or start thinking about how you can improve, whether or not you should change jobs, live a different kind of life. We could move to a place where it doesn't cost so much to live. Make those plans, and then, thirdly, sometimes there are support mechanisms, and there are hard times in life when we really suffer a lot. If there are family support mechanisms, or of another nature, don't be ashamed to ask for them, because on many occasions, we're embarrassed to ask for help. But you have to ask for help. I've known some sad examples of people who ended up in a bad way because they didn't ask for help. Asking for help requires being humble. You have to do it. Sometimes you have to ask for help. I mean, look, I can't take anymore. Or family and friends come, or sometimes communities. I would also say, in that sense, the community is important. If a person has faith and is a member of a parish or another type of community, it's important, as you can ask for help. I mean, don't be left alone to deal with the financial problem.